Shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? I give the call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration. Yesterday, the Prime Minister couldn't explain if any ministerial intervention had occurred regarding the 20 tourist visas issued to people from the terrorist-controlled Gaza war zone that were cancelled and then reinstated on appeal. Will the Minister finally confirm whether any representations or ministerial intervention occurred to support any of these 20 cases?
The call to the Leader of the House.
All decisions were made by the department.
The call to the Honourable Member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government helping workers and families with the cost of living and a more secure retirement? What approaches has the government rejected?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The reason I'm especially grateful to the member for Dunkley for asking this question today is because I remember well being in her community during her by-election campaign earlier this year, talking about one of the major reasons why we changed the tax cuts was to deliver for Australian women and Australian workers more broadly, but also speaking to the early childhood educators in your community, in her community, Mr Speaker, about our best efforts to try and get them the decent pay that they need and deserve to do their really important work. And so in the short time that the member for Dunkley has been here, we've made substantial progress on the issues that we discussed that day. Now, Mr Speaker, this is a really big day for Australian parents, but especially for the mums of Middle Australia, because today the government introduced legislation to pay superannuation on paid parental leave. And here I want to pay tribute to Minister Rishworth and Minister Jones and Minister Gallagher and the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, the caucus, for making sure that we deliver on this commitment to Australian working parents to pay superannuation on paid parental leave. This policy has been a priority of ours for some time, and we are really proud to be taking the necessary steps to deliver it. It's a really important part of our efforts to ensure that Australian women earn more and keep more of what they earn, and also retire with more as well, Mr Speaker. Paying super on PPL will provide a more secure retirement for around 180,000 families each year. Now, unlike Senator Rennick and some of his colleagues on the other side, we support women's workforce participation and more secure, well-paid jobs for women, and we are making good progress, Mr Speaker. Most of the almost 1 million jobs that have been created under this Prime Minister have been jobs filled by women. Women's workforce participation is now at a record high of 63.2%. We are delivering really important pay rises in parts of our economy where the workforce is dominated by women, early childhood, aged care and the like. And we, as I said a moment ago, Mr Speaker, one of the main motivations for delivering a tax cut for every taxpayer in the way that we are doing it is to make sure that Australian working women get a fairer go as well. And because of that, combined with the wages growth that we've seen, the average take-home pay for women working full-time is more than $68 a week higher than it would have been under the wage growth of those opposite and the tax cuts of those opposite, Mr Speaker. We have spent this week working for and delivering for Middle Australia. We've been focused on the main game while they have been focused on political games, Mr Speaker. It's all about Australian workers earning more and keeping more of what they earn, and because of our efforts, retiring with more as well.
The call to the Honourable Member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the government's issuing of tourist visas to nearly 3,000 people from the terrorist-controlled Gaza war zone, with nearly 1,300 already arrived in Australia. Can the Prime Minister provide details on any concerns raised by the New South Wales State Police or the New South Wales Government regarding this matter?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Congratulations, Labor Party and Parents Council.
Thanks very much. I'm asked about New South Wales, and the New South Wales and the New South Wales
Penrith Council
as for the New South Wales Police, I haven't had contact with the New South Wales Police on this matter. I can confirm that. As for New South Wales in the Penrith area, I know that there's a very happy number 5 on the East Ward ticket for Penrith Council.
Call to order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy will cease interjecting. When the House comes to order, we will hear from the member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for National Disability Insurance Scheme. How do the Albanese Labor government's groundbreaking reforms to the NDIS help participants on the scheme and ensure that it is returned to its true purpose so that it will be around for future generations?
Give the call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
This morning I was contacted by a mother whose son is on the NDIS. I have her permission to read excerpts of her letter. It explains why this legislation should pass. Hi, Mr Shorten. I woke up this morning to an article in the newspaper reporting that you've won sufficient support for your proposed changes to the NDIS. I then went to find my 15-year-old son in the kitchen where he was tearing the place up. It was 4:45 a.m. He's a diagnosis of level 3 autism, moderate intellectual disabilities, non-verbal, incontinent, has severe sensory dysfunction and is a beautiful but huge 6 foot 100 kilograms boy. His behaviours are exhausting, they're difficult, at times they're scary. He'll punch, pinch or bite without notice. He defecates on the floor every day and he smears and eats it. He can do very little for himself and depends on home care from me, my husband and our carers. He's been an NDIS participant for 10 years. We can't survive with our care for him but feel unsupported and completely price-gouged and exploited. I wish you every success in your changes to the NDIS. Please help us families who really need support. We're so sick of hearing about funding being used for holidays, lawn mowing and so on when we can hardly survive. Maybe because we're so busy and burnt out we can't make as much noise. I can promise this amazing mum and her son hope in the new legislation. The first step is the new planning process. It will be strength-based needs assessment. It will identify her son's strengths, goals, preferences and challenges. The assessment will be done by an accredited assessor who will meet with the family. The assessor will use various tools co-designed with people with disability and will respect her son's dignity and rights. The second step is an assessment report, a summary, an assessment of the findings and recommend the types of supports needed, prepared by the assessor who will work with the family. A clear, accurate, evidence-based report reflecting her son's strengths, needs and preferences. The third step will be a flexible budget and stated supports. It's a funding package determined for her son on his report and NDIS rules. The flexible budget is the money to spend on NDIS supports as they choose, as long as they're reasonable and necessary. And the fourth step will be to choose supports that he wants with his flexible budget, a chance for the son and the mother to plan and buy the supports that suit his needs and preferences by working with a dedicated navigator. The bill will ensure clarity as to what you can and can't spend your funding on. This bill, hopefully passed in the next 2 hours here, will give her son more choice and control over supports and improve his quality of life. It will be co-designed, the new system, co-designed with people with disability and their families. It will be based on the steps, assessment, report, budget and choosing supports. The new system will be personalised, transparent and consistent. It will respect her son's dignity, rights and aspirations. I thank the thousands of people who have contributed to the development of this legislation, and this afternoon this parliament will help all Australians and their families with disability.
Yeah. Give the call to the honourable member for McKellar.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Treasurer. Just last week the government appointed a former Labor Premier to the board of Australia Post. She replaces someone who was a former director of the Liberal Party, appointed unsurprisingly by the previous coalition government. In February 23, this government commissioned a review of public sector board appointments to respond to transparency concerns. The report of that review was given to the government in August 23. Treasurer, 12 months on, why has the report not been released publicly and when will it be released? Thank you.
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for McKellar for her question in my capacity representing the Finance Minister. Mr Speaker, our government is all about ensuring strong governance and accountability of public service entities. It's a very high priority for us, and as the member knows, we undertook a review of public sector board appointments when we came to office to process and consider and propose the best standards for the way board members are appointed to public sector boards. We're very grateful to former Public Service Commissioner Linnell Briggs for her report, which is with the government for consideration, and that's what the honourable member refers to in her question. We are committed to a strong foundation of integrity right across the public service. We do recognise that we need to get the right diversity of skills and experience for public sector boards to provide the right kind of oversight and direction to government entities. We also know that appointment processes for boards have to be conducted in a way that enhances trust in government bodies. So this is part of our agenda to try and clean up the way that government runs after the shambolic way, I believe, that the former government ran itself, including the Prime Minister appointing himself to multiple cabinet positions, the former Prime Minister. Now, I'm asked about former Premier Palaszczuk.
Order. The Manager of Opposition Business will cease interjecting. The Treasurer will pause and we will hear from the member for McKellar.
Point of order, relevance. When is it likely that the report will be released publicly? Thank you.
The Treasurer is directing his remarks and being directly relevant about the question, and he was just turning to the point of the question that was at the start of the question. He has the remaining 1 minute 14 to answer the question. He has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I said earlier, the report is with the government for consideration. When it comes to former Premier Palaszczuk, I believe that that's a very good appointment to the board of Australia Post, and I think it is very hard to sustain the argument that former Premier Palaszczuk's 8 years as Premier of Queensland doesn't qualify
Members
her
on my left, the
for that important role.
Interjecting.
And I know that there will always be a range of views about government appointments. Our job, our objective and our record is appointing the best people that we can to these government positions, because we know how important it is that these government boards are guided in the best possible way.
Before I call the member for Werra, I'll just do some acknowledgements in the gallery. I informed the House today that present in the gallery today is a delegation of young leaders from across Australia and the Pacific taking part in the National Leadership Forum hosted by the member for Barrowa and the member for Solomon. Today in the gallery we have guests of the member for Durack and students from the mighty electorate of Durack, from the Geraldton Grammar School. Former New South Wales member for Monaro, Nicole Overall, is joining us today. And I'm also pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is Mr Alan Pidgeon AM, Chair of the National Australian Flag Association, a voluntary community organisation formed to increase appreciation of the history and significance of our national flag. Mr Pidgeon is in Canberra today as part of the celebration of Australian National Flag Day, which will be held on September 3. Welcome to you all. And I give the call to the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting Australian families? What's been the response to the Albanese Labor government's legislation to pay superannuation on paid parental leave?
Call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for her question and for her tireless work for families in the electorate of Werriwa. Of course, today is an important day for Australian families. This morning I introduced legislation into the parliament to pay superannuation on government-paid parental leave. Now, this reform is good for families, good for women, good for the economy, and we are proud to be legislating it. Now, through paid parental leave, the government supports parents to take a step back from paid work. And through this bill, we are taking action to not only provide critical financial support when a new baby arrives, but also boost their retirement savings as well. Now, with this measure from July 2025, around 180,000 families each year who take the government-paid parental leave will receive superannuation contribution of 12% directly into their super account. This is the third tranche of our government's historic reform to paid parental leave, an investment totalling $2.3 billion, which has given families more access, made it more flexible, easier to share care, more generous, and with the expansion to 6 months by 2026. But, Mr Speaker, I've been asked what the response has been to this morning's legislation. And earlier today, I had the opportunity, along with the Treasurer and the Minister for Finance, to meet Canberra mum Aisling and her kids Leo and Josie. Aisling told me, I come from an early childhood background and know the importance of that extra time with children and that extra super that is now going to be there. Now, we've seen many groups welcome this announcement and the introduction of this important bill. The Business Council of Australia called it the right thing to do for both women and the economy. The ACT called it a historic step in achieving gender equality in retirement. Georgie Dent from the Parenthood said paying super on paid parental leave would be a game changer for families across Australia, with a significant win for gender equality. And the Super Members Council have also welcomed our bill, saying this historic reform will make a vast difference to the lives and retirement incomes of generations of Australian women. When we announced our commitment to paid super on paid parental leave, the opposition did provide a lukewarm support, and I urge them to get behind this legislation in the Senate and get this done. Now, we know that investing in paid parental leave is an investment in Australian families, in women's economic security and the broader economy, and I look forward to seeing this come to fruition.
The call to the member for Wannon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, will individuals currently in the terrorist-controlled Gaza war zone who have already been granted a visa by this government be subject to face-to-face interviews or biometric checks before they arrive in Australia?
Order. The Chief Government Whip is warned. The order. The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, I thank the member for his question, and we know that there's been a change in the position of those opposite who were saying there'd be a total ban and now saying a temporary pause, a softening of that. But of course it's interesting to call for a temporary pause on a border which is closed. The border is closed. I met earlier today with the Prime Minister of Qatar to speak constructively. If he doesn't want it.
The Prime Minister is 24 seconds in. So, if the Prime Minister's concluded his answer. All right, we'll move to the next question. Order. The member for Wannon is given the call out of courtesy. It is not then an opportunity to abuse that privilege. Members on my left are going to cease interjecting. Order. We'll hear from the member for Parramatta.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to support university students across the country?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my friend, the brilliant member for Parramatta, for his question. Mr Speaker, as you know, as most members know, we're wiping $3 billion of student debt for more than 3 million Australians, including more than 23,000 people living in the member for Parramatta's electorate. And for someone with a HECS debt of, say, $26,000, I'll see about $1,200 wiped from that debt later this year. But that's not the only thing that we're doing to help university students. We're also introducing for the first time paid prac. That's financial support for teaching students, for nursing students, for midwifery students and social work students to help them with the practical part of their degree. And again, it's not the only thing we're doing to help university students. We're also going to massively increase those fee-free university-ready courses that act as a bridge between school and university, give people those foundational skills they need to start a university degree. My department advises me that this has the potential to double the number of people doing those courses by the end of next decade. Again, it's not the only thing that we're doing. As I told the House yesterday, we're also doubling the number of university study hubs across the country, bringing university closer to where people live. That includes 14 of these hubs for the first time in the outer suburbs of our big cities, where the percentage of people with a university degree is low, and 20 more in the regions and in the bush. And yesterday I announced that applications are open for a further 10 regional university study hubs. But again, Mr Speaker, it's not the only thing we're doing. Universities aren't just places where people study or where they work. They're also places where people live. We need to ensure that they are safe. 1 in 20 students have been sexually assaulted since they started university, 1 in 6 sexually harassed, and 1 in 2, when they make a complaint, have felt like they weren't heard. This is what one student told the Stop campaign. I'm sick of my friends being assaulted. I'm sick of begging to feel safe. And I'm sick of being ignored. Mr Speaker, the awful truth is that not enough has been done to address sexual violence in our universities, and for too long students haven't been heard. That is now changing. I announced earlier this year that we would establish a national student ombudsman that will be independent and have the power to investigate complaints and resolve disputes with universities. And next month, when Parliament returns, I'll introduce legislation to make that a reality.
Call to the honourable member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How many people from the Gaza war zone has Qatar accepted?
Order. Order. No, we're going to have some silence as the member for Capricornia was heard in silence. We're not going to interject before an answer is heard. Members on my right, I'm looking at you. The Prime Minister has the call.
Speaker, I did meet with the Prime Minister of Qatar earlier today. Those opposite regarded that meeting as being not relevant, hence the point of order moved by the member for Wannon. I am responsible for what the Australian government does, not what the Qatari government does, and it would be...
Order. The Leader of the Opposition... Just everyone, the Leader of the Opposition is going to cease interjecting. Members on my right... Order. The Prime Minister will have the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. He's getting angry again, Mr Speaker. Getting angry again. Perhaps if he can inform us about what the Prime Minister of Qatar said to him, I don't know. But that's a matter for him of whether to disclose or not. It was a good meeting with the Prime Minister of Qatar. It follows on meetings of the Prime Minister of New Zealand and the President-elect of Indonesia in the last week.
Order. Give a call to the honourable member for Moreton.
My question is to the Attorney-General. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to combat family and gender-based violence online and in the family law system?
Give a call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Moreton for his question, and I'd like to thank the member for Moreton for his sustained commitment to family law reform in this country.
He will be greatly missed. The Albanese government is committed to tackling gender-based violence. Digitally created and altered sexually explicit material shared without consent is a damaging and deeply distressing form of abuse, and we know that this abuse overwhelmingly targets women and girls. It inflicts deep, long-lasting harm on victims, it perpetuates harmful gender stereotypes, and it contributes to gender-based violence. The Albanese government has no tolerance for this insidious criminal behaviour, and yesterday the parliament passed our bill that creates new criminal offences that ban the sharing of non-consensual, sexually explicit deepfake material online. The new criminal offences make clear that those who share sexually explicit material without consent using technology like artificial intelligence will face very serious criminal penalties, and these penalties will assist in protecting vulnerable people from serious online harm and deter and punish this abusive and damaging behaviour. And today, also in relation to combating family and gender-based violence in the family law system, I've introduced legislation into this House to make the family law system simpler, safer and fairer for all Australian families. Shockingly, family and domestic violence is present in approximately 80% of parenting matters in the family courts. The proposed reforms will make it clear that the economic impact of family violence is a relevant consideration in family property matters. Victims of family violence should not be financially disadvantaged when they leave a violent relationship. And among other things, it's quite a long and detailed bill, but among other things, the new laws will treat pets as a special form of property to ensure that pets are not used and abused in cycles of family violence. These reforms will build on the Albanese government's landmark family law reforms that came into effect in May this year, which put the best interests of children at the centre of decision-making in the family court and established new information sharing arrangements to protect against family safety risks. Given the significant and continuing harm caused by family and domestic violence, I look forward to the full support of this parliament for these reforms. The Albanese government is delivering on its commitment to end violence against women, to tackle the scourge of online harm and to keep Australians safe.
Order. No, order. Members on my right. The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister.
Order. The Minister for Resources will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Over the last 2 weeks, the Prime Minister has dodged about 30 questions on the government's handling of people coming from terrorist-controlled Gaza since October 7. It's now clear that by cutting corners and concocting the Visa for Votes scheme, this government has put domestic political considerations ahead of national security, and Australians are now less safe.
And I'm going to deal with this issue. Just if the Leader of the House, this comment that was used yesterday, I've spent a bit of time overnight dealing with imputations in questions, and I know yesterday we had this issue raised, and I just want to deal with this so the House is clear with my position. It will take me a little while to get through this, but it's important for the House to understand and all members to understand moving forward. Speaker Andrew, in 2000, outlined in detail the most comprehensive description of improper motives, and it was highlighted on page 556 of practice, which outlines those sorts of comments in questions not being allowed or being permitted, particularly with personal motives, regardless of where it's directed to. Speaker Smith had examples of ruling questions out of order on the 15th of February 2021 and the 4th of December 2018. And in those questions, one was to the Prime Minister, then Prime Minister, one was then to the Assistant Treasurer, and those sorts of characteristics or comments during the questions were ruled out. And Speaker Smith, on page 12434 of Hansard, particularly with this issue, said, "I'm certainly not comfortable with the language that just makes assertions as it did. I'm really not. And those on my left, who were then the opposition, wouldn't be comfortable if that sort of language was directed back at them." Myself, on the 14th of February, to the member for Ryan, I asked her to redirect and rephrase a question, and on the 12th of February 2024, I asked the member for Curtin to do the same. So for consistency, from Speaker Andrew to Speaker Smith to myself, I'm just going to rule that part of the question out. So I'll just allow the Leader of the Opposition to start the question again without that part of the question to assist the House.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Over the last 2 weeks, the Prime Minister has dodged almost 30 questions on the government's handling of people coming from terrorist-controlled Gaza since October 7. It's now clear that by cutting corners, this government has put domestic political considerations ahead of national security, and Australians are now less safe. Will the Prime Minister apologise for breaking his promise before the election to keep Australians safe?
Give the court order. The Minister for Industry and Science is warned. The Prime Minister has the call.
It's about questions that have been asked in this parliament over the last 2 weeks. But in fact, the questions didn't begin over the last 2 weeks. They began from last Wednesday. They began from the moment in which our Olympians came home and the Leader of the Opposition did an interview on Sky News in which he declared that no one should be allowed in from Gaza, even though the fact is the border from Gaza had been closed for months and with no response or no issues raised by those opposite while people were actually coming in. They waited until people weren't coming in and the border was closed. So there the Leader of the Opposition was at the home of the Olympians coming home. Should have been a moment of national unity. He chose division once again. The Australian scarf stayed on, but the mask behind this divisive Leader of the Opposition came off, and he's still going. On Monday, he asked about terrorist visas. Terrorist visas. On Tuesday, after being called out for being so angry and for not focusing on the cost of living, he moved that the Treasurer be no longer heard. And yesterday, he gagged himself by not asking a single question in question time, but having others ask questions, fed up to them, including like the ones today, which seem to suggest somehow that I'm responsible for who's in Qatar. I'll tell you who's in Qatar, who I wouldn't allow in Qatar. That's the Hamas leadership. I would not allow in Australia. That is what I would do. Now, yesterday, every day,
members on my left will cease interjecting.
They've been out there talking about Abdul Rizvi, a former Deputy Secretary at the Department of Immigration. He had this to say. The Leader of the Opposition, talking about the Leader of the Opposition, is the guy who allowed the biggest labour trafficking scam in Australian history and at the same time made massive cuts to immigration compliance funding, a Labor trafficker's dream. And indeed, today he's gone on to say about the Shadow Minister Patterson, if Senator Patterson read the whole article, I actually said the national security dimension of this is a beat-up. The checks these people go through are extensive, so to suggest there is a national security risk here is a complete beat-up.
Prime Minister's
there is no evidence that the government recklessly issued to...
Call to the honourable member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Speaker. And my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. How is the Albanese Labor government working to deliver a better future for Australian women, and including working to improve the standards in our parliament?
The call to the Minister representing the Minister for Women.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for Newcastle for the question, but I also particularly want to mention her advocacy for women, which is in a large part responsible for many of the measures that this government is putting in place. She, alongside the Women on the Status of Women Committee on this side of the House, have been extraordinary advocates for women for their entire careers, and I thank them for that. This government is strongly committed to women's equality. It's a goal that every single one of us around the cabinet table have. It's not the responsibility of just one minister, it is the responsibility of every cabinet minister. And this week we have, of course, continued to make significant progress. Yesterday, as we've heard, the Parliament passed laws criminalising the creation and distribution of non-consensual deep fake pornography. It is an issue that overwhelmingly affects women and girls, and will now carry criminal penalties, including the possibility of jail up to 7 years. That is a very good thing. It is an issue. Earlier this week, the Assistant Minister for the Prevention of Family Violence reaffirmed our commitment to ending gender-based violence in her powerful statement in this place. The Assistant Minister, alongside the Minister for Social Services, are doing an incredible job leading the work on the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children. And, of course, the Minister for Social Services in introducing our legislation to provide greater support to Australian families, particularly women, to pay superannuation on government-paid parental leave, benefiting over 180,000 people per year. This is a government that is working hard to make women's lives better, fairer, more equal, particularly through shifting the gender pay gap. Data released from the ABS just last week shows that the national gender pay gap is at 11.5%. This is a record low, and it compares to a gender pay gap of 14.1% in May 2022 when we came to government. Under this government, women's average weekly earnings have increased by $173.80 since May 2022. That's a 10.8% increase. And we've reached an all-time high for women's workforce participation, which is now at 63.2%. We are taking action to close that pay gap. And as a parliament, we should be setting an example for the treatment of women in this workplace and communities across the country, which is why we're working to implement the recommendations of the Set the Standard report. This week, the government introduced legislation to the House to establish the Independent Parliamentary Standards Commission. I thank members from across the chamber who have engaged in good faith on this bill that will enforce behaviour codes for parliamentarians and staff in Commonwealth parliamentary workforces. This is another important reform that supports the safety and well-being of women in this place and demonstrates that the government is leading by example and is committed to women's safety.
Call to the honourable member for Curtin.
This is a question for the Prime Minister. A mum from Curtin told me that yesterday her 15-year-old son said he's decided to take up sports gambling as a side hustle because it's easy money. Our committee inquiry contained 31 recommendations to reduce harm from predatory online gambling companies. 14 months later, only one recommendation, banning ads, has even been discussed. Will the government respond to the other 30 recommendations before the next election?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Curtin for her question and for her genuine interest in what is a major issue concerning mums and dads and families right around the country, concerned about the impact that a whole range of media can have, whether it's gambling, advertising, or whether it's the sort of media that sometimes pops up on people's mobile phone. There are a range of issues with social media causing a great deal of concern about the harm that can be caused. We have, in 2 years, we have done more than any government in Australian history with regard to tackling and recognising that gambling can do harm, including in gambling advertising. We have said there is more to do. We will do more, and we'll continue to work with the crossbench and others in this chamber on these issues in a constructive way. And I thank the member for Curtin and others for the way that they've engaged in this process.
Give a call to the member for Paterson.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry and Capability Delivery. What progress is the Albanese Labor government making to improve defence capability and defence industrial capacity? And why is this required after a decade of waste in defence portfolios?
The call to the Minister for Defence Industry and Capability Delivery and the Minister for International Development and the Pacific.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for her question and her commitment to the defence of the nation. The first duty of any Commonwealth government is to keep Australians safe and protect our interests. That's why this morning I was proud to announce that the Albanese Labor government will invest $850 million to manufacture advanced long-range strike missiles in Australia. In partnership with Consberg Australia, we're investing in a factory at Newcastle Airport to manufacture naval strike missiles and joint strike missiles. This will create 500 jobs in construction and 100 ongoing high-skill, high-tech jobs. This will be only the second factory in the world to produce these advanced strike missiles and the first outside of Norway. Australian industry is highly skilled, cost-competitive, and we will actually receive these missiles, Australian-made missiles, faster than if we joined the global queue. Speaker, this is all about keeping Australians safe in an uncertain global environment, creating local jobs and supporting a future made in Australia. And that's in stark contrast to the approach when the Leader of the Opposition was the Defence Minister. While the Leader of the Opposition was sitting in the NSC and Minister for Defence, Australia experienced a wasted decade. It was all Top Gun music and red carpets and zero delivery. Zero delivery. Under him, the Guided Weapons Enterprise produced 2 media releases. That's it, 2 media releases. Under us, we're building 2 missile factories. 2 missile factories. Under him, Navy's maximum strike range was about 200 kilometres using 1970s technology. Under us, it'll be 2,500 kilometres. Under him, 2 Australian shipyards closed and over 2,000 workers lost their jobs. Under us, there will be continual shipbuilding in South Australia and Western Australia, providing decades of work. Under him, he wanted submarines built overseas. Under us, we're building submarines here, creating 20,000 jobs. The truth is the Leader of the Opposition is weak on national security. He's all bluster and glass jaw. By contrast, we're funding Australia's defence force appropriately, providing strategic direction, keeping Australians safe and building a future made in Australia.
There's far, far too much noise. That wall of noise is unacceptable. If it continues, there will be general warnings and people will just leave the chamber. Maybe the last day, but I want standards enforced today. Give the call to the member for Cowper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, when the Rafah border crossing reopens, will the thousands of people holding a tourist visa to travel to Australia be eligible to travel immediately?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Speaker, I'm asked about the reopening of the Rafah border crossing by the member for Cowper, and he may have information that I don't have. And that's possible, Mr Speaker. That is possible.
Order. The member for Banks.
But I think it's unlikely, Mr Speaker. I think it's unlikely. But what I do want to see, are borders which are able to reopen because there is a release of hostages from Gaza currently being kept by Hamas, because there is an end to the death and destruction that we see against too many innocent civilians in Gaza on our TV screens every night, because we see an advance in peace and security between Israelis and Palestinians, because we see in the region a recognition by Arab states of the State of Israel and the right for it to continue to exist within secure borders, but also the right of Palestinians, the legitimate aspiration that they have to live in peace and security behind their borders. That's what I hope for. That is something that has been long-standing bipartisan policy in the Australian Parliament for a long period of time. And Australia has a proud history going back to our role in the United Nations, with, importantly, the creation of not one state, but the creation of two states, which was the vision of the United Nations in which Australia played an important leadership role. I believe that Australians, when they look at what is happening in that part of the world, are horrified, but particularly for people of Jewish background or descent or faith, people of Islamic background or faith, people with relatives in that region want to see this happen. And what they don't want also is conflict brought here. They want Australia to play a constructive role.
Order.
A constructive role.
Has asked the question.
A constructive role in the region. They object to some of the misinformation which is out there about Australia's role in that conflict, which is we are not participants, but we are people who, consistent with the role Australia has historically played, advocates for peace and security and for humanitarian values and for the protection of all innocent life, whether it be Israeli or Palestinian.
Call to the honourable member for Cornwall.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. How is the Albanese Labor government's Future Made in Australia plan helping regions and suburbs that depend on manufacturing? What approaches to manufacturing has the government ruled out?
Call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thanks, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Cornwall for a question. She wants, like we all do on this side of the House, for Australia to be a place that makes things. Makes things like Australian steel, where we've got a proud heritage in steel making. And the strength and quality of Aussie steel has supported sectors across the economy. It's sustained communities from the Illawarra to the Hunter to central Queensland, Whyalla, through to the outer suburbs of Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. It delivers so many secure, well-paying jobs, and this has got to continue. The reality is the world's changing and we've got to prepare for it. We've got to find new ways to sustainably make steel. Demand for green steel expected to almost double by 2050, and demand for green aluminium expected to double by 2030. Other countries know this and they're making significant investments to decarbonise, and we cannot be left behind. As part of our Future Made in Australia plans, the Albanese government started work on charting a course for the future of Australian green steel and metals manufacturing. And today we took another step down that path, bringing together an expert panel to advise the government on what's needed to shape a sustainable metals future. Industry, unions, research partners working with government to plan a bright future for Australian metals. As BlueScope CEO Tanya Archibald notes, for Australia to capitalise on the opportunity, ambitious, forward-thinking policy will be required, with industry working in partnership with government. But I'm asked about different approaches, and boy, we've heard some. The only thing that the Liberal and National parties do faster than claim they support manufacturing is to walk away from that very claim. And it's been particularly staggering to see Queensland Liberal and National Party MPs so willingly dud manufacturing workers from their great state. The member for Flynn described our $45 million investment into electrolyser manufacturing in Gladstone in his electorate as economic insanity. The member for Herbert said manufacturing in Townsville isn't viable and described supporting manufacturing jobs as reckless. And the member for Wide Bay, not to be outdone, said he totally disagrees with the premise of creating manufacturing jobs in Maryborough and Hervey Bay. No to making things here. Yes to importing everything. That's that side.
Order.
No putting
Member
Queensland
Barker.
workers on the job making the metals, processing minerals or building batteries and solar panels. After question time, they'll all fly home, put on their high-vis vests and act like they're the best friend regional workers ever had. But Queensland workers need to know that here in Canberra, the LNP MPs were not there for them and their future. It is a disgrace.
Member for Flynn, the member for O'Connor, the member for Barker and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition were making far too much noise. To assist the House and to assist me, I'd like them to cease interjecting for the remainder of question time. Give the call to the member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Health Minister. According to the National Rural Health Alliance, regional Australians receive $848 less per year in health spend than metropolitan Australians, an expenditure gap of $6.55 billion. How will the government urgently address this alarming health care spending inequity?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank my fellow South Australian, the member for Mayo, for that question and our ongoing dialogue on delivering better health care and aged care and other services in her electorate, her beautiful electorate, through the Adelaide Hills, the Fleurieu Peninsula and many more areas besides. And certainly one of our discussions has been about the challenges in accessing good quality, affordable health care the further away you get from our nation's GPOs. It's not just an issue in rural and regional Australia. Increasingly this is a challenge in some of our outer suburban, peri-urban areas, and it's one we are very, very focused on. If I could say a few things about ways in which we're seeking to address that. First of all, as I think the member for Mayo and I have discussed, we are right near the end stage of the review we're currently undertaking about the distribution rules to ensure that all areas have access to doctors but other health professionals as well. That's been a review in which the Rural Health Alliance and a range of other rural health groups, ACRM, the Rural Doctors College and many others besides have participated in very, very fully. From our first budget in October 2022, we increased the incentives that are available for doctors to go and practice in rural and regional Australia. We lifted those incentives in dollar terms and we expanded them in terms of the skills that doctors might be able to take to rural and regional Australia, with a particular emphasis on ensuring that skills around emergency medicine, around obstetrics and around mental health were given greater incentives to move out of our major cities and into the rural area. I keep getting interjections from the Leader of the Nationals, Mr Speaker. It would be nice if he asked a question about rural health instead of allowing every single question for this entire week to be about the Middle East instead of health issues in rural and regional Australia. Perhaps if the Leader of the Nationals were a bit interested, ask me a question about it. But I come back to the question for the member for Mayo. I'd make this point as well. As the member for Mayo knows, we tripled the bulk billing incentive for visits to the doctor, because I know that bulk billing rates have been declining more sharply in rural and regional Australia than in urban Australia. I'm very pleased to say that the biggest increases to bulk billing for GP visits in the 8 months that incentive has been operating has been in rural and regional Australia. And I'm not sure of the latest data, but the member for Mayo's electorate has either seen the biggest or the second biggest increase in GP bulk billing rates of any electorate in this parliament over the last 8 months. Now, what that does for a standard consult in rural and regional Australia is lift the income for those doctors by 50%. We know there is more to do, but I appreciate at least the member for Mayo.
Concluded. Call to the honourable member for Hawke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting early childhood educators?
Call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and the Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I do thank the member for Hawke for his question. I particularly
enjoyed visiting an early learning centre in the member for Hawke's electorate, Yellak Burrum, as well as meeting some early childhood educators who are going to be part of our early childhood education workforce as they were studying Certificate 3. And, Mr Speaker, the member for Hawke, like all on this side of the House, know just how important the work of early childhood educators is, how important it is for setting up our children to thrive, how important it is for our economy, how important it is for families. And I'm proud to be part of a Labor government that recognises that value and the importance of that work. And as part of this recognition, the recognition that we have for early childhood education and care, and the recognition that we have for early childhood educators and teachers, I'm proud that we're delivering that 15% historic wage increase for early childhood workers right across the country. Now, that means that 200,000 early childhood workers right across Australia will have in their pay packets at least $100 more a week by the end of this year. And by the end of next year, that means at least another $150 back in their pay packets by the end of next year. Now, Mr Speaker, along with the member for Hawke and members from right across this side, as I've travelled around visiting early childhood education centres, talking to educators, talking to parents, I've heard a lot about it from educators over the past few weeks about what this $3.6 billion investment means to them. It means that they'll have a livable wage. And as Courtney, who is a passionate early childhood educator from Tasmania, said, she said, this wage increase would have a huge impact. It would help me to afford my bills comfortably, have a social life, help my mindset when dealing with the challenges that we deal with every day at work. I think that says it all. I think that says it all, Mr Speaker, about just how incredibly important, what a difference this 15% wage increase is going to make to early childhood educators and workers across Australia. It's not just about giving them the wage that they deserve. It really is about ensuring that we have a strong and stable workforce, the kind of workforce that we need for the transformations that we want to undertake in early childhood education and care to achieve that vision that we have for a universal system that is affordable, that is accessible and that is inclusive. We can't do that if we don't have a strong and stable workforce. It is what the children of Australia deserve, it is what the families of Australia deserve, and it is what an Albanese Labor government will deliver.
The call to the member for Barara.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, on October 7, Hamas terrorists went into small Israeli farming villages and a music festival, where they filmed themselves gleefully murdering children, raping women and mutilating their victims, including after death. 1,300 innocent people were gunned down and murdered for sport, and 251 hostages were forced at gunpoint into Hamas terror tunnels under Gaza. On return, thousands of people were dancing in the streets in celebration. Prime Minister, does supporting Hamas pass the character test for an Australian visa?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Barara for his question. And I know that he, as a proud Jewish Australian, was hurt, as are other members of the Jewish community right around, not just Australia but around the world, by the events, the horrific events of October 7. They shocked also, I think, anyone with any human values at all. One of the things that I've said to people here who I think have been in any way equivocal, unlike the government that has been unequivocal, and as has the opposition in their condemnation of what happened in October 7, is that the people who were there at the Nova Music Festival look like a whole lot of people who would attend a Splendour in the Grass concert, would attend the sort of events that happen here in Australia where young people celebrate their common humanity, where they engage in fun, and where they also tend to be people who are open to ideas and open to collaboration across people of different faith, etc. And one of the things that some of the Jewish community leaders have said to me in the wake of October 7 is that they are precisely the sort of people who want to see peace and reconciliation with the Palestinians as well. There they were, very close to where the border was, and to have them subjected to the horrific murder, rape and abuse that occurred, the kidnapping of people is horrific if it occurred to any human being. But of course, because of one of the reasons why the world came together in the wake of World War II, in the wake of the Holocaust, was to...
No, I'm not. I'm not taking the point of order. Give the court order. Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the Chief Government Whip.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering cost of living relief, and what approaches have been ruled out?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. If you want a question on the cost of living or inflation or the economy, you've got to rustle one up yourself. Because when the people of this country are under pressure, and when the cost of living is the #1 pressure that people are feeling, those opposite couldn't care less. Those opposite could not care less, and we know that because they haven't asked any questions this week on the cost of living or inflation or the economy more broadly. It's after 3 o'clock on the Thursday of a sitting week, and just total silence from those opposite on the #1 issue that this country and its people confronts, Mr Speaker. Well, those opposite might not care about the cost of living, but this side of the parliament does. And that's why we're rolling out cost of living relief with a tax cut for every taxpayer, energy bill relief for every household, cheaper medicines, cheaper early childhood education, rent assistance, Mr Speaker, and getting wages moving again after a decade of wage stagnation, Mr Speaker. We're focused on the main game and they're focused on playing political games. We want to lift people up, and this opposition leader wants to punch down, Mr Speaker. We want to help people doing it tough, and they just want to divide people and set Australians against Australians.
The Treasurer is going to pause. The Deputy Prime Minister will cease suggesting. I wish to hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, you've ruled yesterday and today on imputations, personal invective and expressions that denigrate the other side, and the language that the Treasurer just used about the Leader of the Opposition does exactly that. I ask you to bring him to order.
Yeah. Just for the remainder of the Treasurer's answers, I don't want any more commentary about people in the answer. Well, I'm just going to ask the... All right, just to assist the House so we can move forward, I'm just going to get the Treasurer to withdraw that statement and keep going.
I'll withdraw, Mr Speaker. Yeah. Mr Speaker,
the member for Gippsland.
This side of the House is focused on finishing the fight against inflation. Yeah. That side of the House is only interested in starting another culture war. Now, there is no shortage of challenges in our economy. The global economy and the domestic economy, and inflation is #1 when it comes to the main challenges in our economy, and we are focused on the main game. Now, in the past couple of years, we've seen inflation come off substantially. We've seen almost 1 million jobs created. We've seen real wages growing again. We've got a tax cut rolling out for every taxpayer, at the same time as we've turned 2 big Liberal deficits into 2 big Labor surpluses. But we know, Mr Speaker, despite all the progress that we have made, that people are still under the pump and people are still under pressure. And that's why it beggars belief, when this is the main game right around Australia, that those opposite can't manage to ask even a single question about the cost of living pressures
Order.
that people
Members
are
on my
confronting. Not one idea about fighting inflation. Not one policy for the cost of living. Absolutely nothing about their $315 billion in secret cuts and what that means for Medicare and pensions and for our economy more broadly, Mr Speaker. This should be a disqualifying week for those opposite. When people are under pressure, they could not care less about the cost of living.
Give a call to the member for Barara.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, does supporting Hamas pass the character test for an Australian visa?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Barara for his question. Everyone who applies for an Australian visa is subject to the same security standard set by the same agencies and the same personnel as under the former government. And our intelligence agencies make those decisions. Our intelligence agencies have the confidence of this side of the House. This side of the House. And so does Mike Burgess, who's made it very clear that if you have violent extremism as an ideology, then you certainly have a problem with an ASIO assessment. ASIO makes these national security assessments. They're not made on a partisan basis or a political basis. ASIO do this work, and they do it as well on an ongoing basis, which is relevant to previous questions that have been asked over the last couple of weeks. Our national security is too important to be used as a political football. Our national security is something that historically in this place, has been above the sort of game playing and targeting that we've seen here. The targeting of any group based upon hate is a bad thing, whether that's people of Jewish faith, people of Islamic faith, people of whatever colour or creed. It is a bad thing, and we see the consequences of hate in too many places of the world at the moment. What I want to do in this great multicultural nation is provide...
The Prime Minister has concluded his answer. Give a call to the honourable member for McNamara.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. What have been the Albanese Labor government's priorities for the parliamentary sitting, and what has stood in the way?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, over the last 2 weeks, despite the negativity and the nastiness of those opposite and the pointless noise coming from across the chamber, this government has got on with the job of delivering for Australia, making sure that childcare workers get a 15% pay rise, bringing the states together to deliver reform of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, working together with our neighbours and partners in Indonesia to strengthen our region's security and stability, as well as meeting with the President-elect of Indonesia, hosting the Prime Ministers of New Zealand and Qatar, progressing our plan for a future made in Australia, and over there in the Senate as we speak, advancing the Net Zero Economy Authority so that gets done as well this week, working to deliver $3 billion in HECS relief and a fairer higher education system, bringing together two great Labor economic reforms by adding superannuation to paid parental leave, dealing with advances so that we take action to remove the scourge of domestic violence in a generation. This is what matters to Australians. This is what makes a difference to people's lives. And this is what my government is focused on. We stand together and we look ahead together, because what our great history has shown us time and time again is that Australia is always best when we come together, when we seek to unite rather than seek to divide, where we try to work with people rather than target individuals in a cynical exercise aimed at targeting a whole group of Australians. Now, I've been asked a lot about numbers in the past week, so here's some numbers I'm focused on, Mr.
Order.
Speaker.
Members on my left.
13.6 million. That's the number of Australians who got a tax cut on July 1. 2.6 million. That's the number of award wage earners who got a pay rise. 3 million, the number of additional bulk billed GP appointments. 10 million, the number of households getting dollars off their power bills. 1 million, the number of families benefiting from cheaper childcare. 650,000, the number of visits to our Medicare urgent care clinics. 500,000, the number of fee-free TAFE enrolments. 70,000, the number of new manufacturing jobs. And over 1 million, the number of households benefiting from increases in rent assistance. That's what we're being focused on. Those opposite have forgotten their job.
Order. The member for Fairfax. Just take a breath. The Prime Minister has the call.
Should be placed on the notice paper.